For 1,000 years, a narrow stretch of land along the eastern edge of the Mediterranean has been unlike any other. This land, roughly the size of New Jersey, has carried the weight of history in ways that few regions can claim. Mountains, deserts, and valleys stretch across it, shaping the lives of those who have sought to inhabit, govern, or claim it. Yet it is not just geography that defines this place. It is the stories that have been told here. The empires that have risen and fallen, the faiths that have been born and tested, and the people who have endured against the odds. This is Israel, a land of stories, struggle, and enduring significance. From the earliest days of human settlement, this region was a crossroads. Caravan routes from Egypt to Mesopotamia, the southern deserts, and the fertile hills of Canaan converged here. Traders, nomads, and armies alike traversed these lands, bringing with them not only goods but ideas, beliefs, and innovations. The soil, though often harsh, yielded crops that could sustain communities, while its hills and valleys provided natural defenses that would shape military and political strategies for generations to come. Those who inhabited this land understood, perhaps instinctively, that to hold it was to possess more than territory. It was to command a narrative of survival and identity. The earliest inhabitants of this land were not uniform in culture or language. Archaeological evidence points to a mosaic of peoples: Canaanites, Amorites, Jebusites, and other tribes whose presence can be traced through ruins, pottery, and inscriptions. These groups engaged in trade, worshipped multiple deities, and built city-states that bore both political and religious authority. Amid this diversity, the stage was set for the emergence of a new people whose story would be defined as much by faith and law as by conquest and settlement. The Israelites, as they would later be known, began as tribal communities bound by shared ancestry, language, and religious tradition. Their narrative would intertwine myth, legend, and historical reality in a manner that continues to captivate scholars and laypeople alike. The biblical accounts, preserved in the Hebrew Scriptures, describe the Israelites' journey from a nomadic existence to the formation of a united monarchy. Archaeology provides tangible confirmation of some events, while challenging or refining others. In either case, the interplay between myth and history is central to understanding the region. These stories were never mere fables. They were frameworks for identity, moral instruction, and political legitimacy. In a land defined by constant contestation, these narratives served as both guidance and glue, binding communities together and providing a sense of purpose and destiny. Over centuries, this small land would witness the rise and fall of kingdoms, the incursions of empires, and the migrations of peoples driven by conquest, trade, or necessity. Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans would each leave their mark, carving the cultural and political landscape while influencing the practices and beliefs of local populations. Through it all, the Israelites, or Jews, as the continuity of their identity came to be recognized, maintained a connection to their homeland, even as they were exiled or dispersed. This attachment was not merely geographic. It was spiritual, cultural, and symbolic, forming the foundation of a national consciousness that would endure through centuries of upheaval. Yet Israel's story is not only about conquest and kings. It is also about human resilience. Families endured famines, sieges, and displacements. Scholars debated interpretations of law and scripture. Farmers and artisans labored in both fertile plains and arid hills. Prophets rose to challenge kings, call for justice, or interpret calamities as signs of divine will. The human dimension of history, these lived experiences, remains central to understanding the land and its people. Without them, Israel's story would be a dry catalog of dates and battles, rather than a vivid tapestry of endurance and aspiration. Geography played an unceasing role in shaping Israel's destiny. The Jordan River Valley, the Galilee Hills, the Negev Desert, and the coastal plains each offered advantages and vulnerabilities. These natural features influenced settlement patterns, agricultural practices, and military campaigns. Invading armies often sought strategic high ground or control of water sources. Cities like Jerusalem, Hebron, and Jericho became more than settlements. They were hubs of religious, economic, and political significance whose fate could determine the stability of the surrounding regions. Religion, inevitably, became intertwined with identity and governance. Early Israelites worshipped a single deity in the midst of a polytheistic landscape. Over time, rituals, sacred spaces, and laws codified in texts such as the Torah distinguished the community culturally and spiritually. Temples and shrines were not just places of worship, they were centers of law, learning, and social cohesion. In moments of conquest or exile, these institutions became symbols of continuity, offering both solace and legitimacy to a people whose survival was repeatedly tested. The strategic location of Israel also meant that it would forever be a land of intersection of cultures, religions, and empires. Caravans brought Egyptian goods one season and Babylonian texts the next. Soldiers marched to defend or subjugate, bringing new technologies, administrative systems, and religious influences. Over centuries, the land became a palimpsest of civilizations, each layer contributing to the complex identity that defines Israel today. Understanding this layering is essential for appreciating why the region remains central not only to local history, but also to the wider narratives of the ancient and modern world. As centuries turned, Israel would witness the rise of monarchs like Saul, David, and Solomon, whose reigns would be remembered both for military triumphs and moral dilemmas. Civil strife, succession crises, and the division of the united monarchy into Israel and Judah would underscore the fragility of political power, even under divine sanction as claimed by religious texts. These events set precedents for governance, law, and social cohesion that reverberate through subsequent periods of exile and foreign domination. Exile, displacement, and return would become recurring motifs in Israel's history. The Babylonian conquest in 586 BCE and the subsequent Persian permission to return epitomized the tension between foreign domination and the enduring desire for homeland. Each conquest, each exile, left marks not only on the land but also on collective memory, shaping identity, law, and narrative in ways that would survive centuries of dispersion. Through it all, the memory of Jerusalem, the temples, and sacred sites persisted as unifying symbols, reinforcing cultural cohesion and inspiring future generations to reclaim and reconstruct their homeland. By the time the Romans arrived, Israel had become a land familiar with the paradoxes of sovereignty and subjugation, faith and pragmatism. Revolts erupted, cities were razed, and the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 CE. Yet even this devastation did not extinguish the connection between people and land. The diaspora spread Jews across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, but the cultural, religious, and historical threads linking them to Israel persisted. Pilgrimages, texts, and traditions kept the land alive in collective memory, maintaining continuity even in the absence of political control. It is this continuity, despite centuries of upheaval, that gives Israel its singular place in history. Few regions can claim such sustained significance across millennia. From ancient kingdoms to modern states, the land has been both a prize and a refuge, a cradle for civilization and a site of contestation. Its story is inseparable from the human condition itself, the struggle for survival, the pursuit of meaning, the search for identity, and the desire to leave a mark upon the world. As we embark on this exploration of Israel's history, it is essential to recognize that we are tracing not only the movements of armies and the decrees of kings, but also the enduring human spirit. Every city, village, and ruin tells a story of adaptation and resilience. Every religious text and historical account represents an attempt to make sense of both triumph and tragedy. And every generation of Israelites, whether living under empire, in exile, or in modern statehood, has contributed to the tapestry of memory that defines this land. Israel is a story of contradictions, faith and skepticism, conquest and exile, suffering and triumph. It is a story that spans thousands of years, yet remains immediately relevant today. Understanding its history requires not only attention to dates and events, but also an appreciation of the cultural, spiritual, and human currents that have shaped it. In every stone and scroll, in every tale passed from generation to generation, the land speaks of endurance, identity, and the inexorable passage of time. In the segments that follow, we will trace this journey in detail from the first united monarchy under Saul and David to the modern state established in the 20th century. We will encounter kings and prophets, conquerors and settlers, exiles and returnees. We will see how geography, faith, culture, and politics intertwine to produce a narrative unlike any other. And above all, we will witness how a small land has produced a history of immense consequence, one that continues to influence the world far beyond its borders. This is Israel, a land shaped by millennia of human endeavor, memory, and aspiration. Its story begins here, in the confluence of myth and history, in the enduring struggle to belong, and in the persistent quest for identity and survival. It is a story that is at once particular and universal, local and global, tragic and triumphant, a story that, despite all, continues to resonate across generations. Around 1000 BCE, in a land crisscrossed by trade routes and defined by hills, valleys, and rivers, the tribes of Israel began to coalesce into something more than loosely connected clans. For centuries, these tribes had survived as pastoral nomads and small settlements, bound together by shared ancestry, language, and emerging religious traditions. They worshipped Yahweh, a deity distinct from the many gods of neighboring peoples. And their lives were framed by laws and customs recorded orally long before they were written down in texts that would eventually become central to the Hebrew Bible. The first step toward political unity came under Saul, the first king of Israel. His reign was a cautious and uneasy experiment in centralized authority. The tribes were fiercely independent, each with its own leaders and loyalties. Saul faced the formidable challenge of uniting them against common enemies, particularly the Philistines, who dominated parts of the coastal plain and threatened the security of the highlands. His kingship was marked by constant negotiation, both with rival tribal chiefs and with the unpredictable currents of public opinion. While Saul's military campaigns had moments of success, they were often undermined by internal dissent and the limitations of a nascent political structure. It was David, Saul's successor, who transformed Israel from a collection of tribes into a more coherent kingdom. David's rise was not straightforward. His early life, as described in biblical and historical sources, involved both pastoral labor and military service, a combination that forged his understanding of leadership and strategy. He first gained fame as a warrior, uniting the tribes through both force and diplomacy. By establishing Jerusalem as the political and spiritual capital, David created a focal point that would endure as the heart of the Israelite identity. Jerusalem's location was strategic. It sat on high ground, defensible, and near trade routes that connected Egypt and Mesopotamia, linking Israel economically and politically to the broader region. David's reign also laid the groundwork for cultural and religious consolidation. He is credited with organizing the priesthood, establishing court systems, and fostering a sense of national cohesion that transcended tribal loyalties. These steps, though often described in religious texts, find echoes in archaeological evidence suggesting the emergence of complex social hierarchies, fortifications, and administrative systems. David's legacy was a kingdom with centralized authority, capable of defending itself and exerting influence over neighboring regions. Solomon, David's son, would take this foundation to its apex. His reign is remembered for wealth, diplomacy, monumental building projects, and the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem, a structure that became the spiritual center of Israel. The temple was more than a religious edifice. It was a symbol of unity and national identity. Here, religious practices were codified, and offerings and rituals reinforced social cohesion. Solomon's wisdom, legendary in both biblical accounts and later historical reflections, was applied to governance, trade, and alliances with neighboring states. His diplomatic marriages, treaties, and economic ventures expanded Israel's influence and stabilized its borders. Yet, even at the height of its power, the kingdom faced persistent challenges. Solomon's heavy taxation and labor demands sowed seeds of discontent among the northern tribes. After his death, around 930 BCE, the united monarchy fractured. The northern kingdom retained the name Israel, while the southern kingdom became Judah. This division reflected long-standing tribal tensions and competing claims to legitimacy, both political and religious. Israel in the north developed its own centers of worship and governance, while Judah in the south maintained Jerusalem as the focal point of spiritual and political authority. The split would have profound consequences, making both kingdoms vulnerable to the ambitions of expanding empires. The northern kingdom of Israel faced threats from powerful neighbors such as Aram Damascus, Phoenicia, and eventually Assyria. Its kings often struggled to maintain internal cohesion while defending against external pressures. The Assyrian conquest in 722 BCE led to the fall of Israel, the exile of large segments of its population, and the introduction of foreign populations into its cities, a process that reshaped the demographic and cultural landscape. These lost tribes of Israel became dispersed, their fate leaving an enduring imprint on the historical imagination. Judah, meanwhile, endured a longer but no less turbulent existence. Its kings navigated the pressures of Assyrian dominance, paying tribute and negotiating survival. The prophetical tradition flourished in Judah, as figures like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Micah warned of moral decay, social injustice, and impending disaster. These prophets were not mere spiritual guides. They were active commentators on governance, ethics, and foreign policy. Their writings preserved not only religious teachings, but also historical insights into the political, social, and economic conditions of the time. The Babylonian Empire, rising to dominance in the 6th century BCE, ultimately conquered Judah. Jerusalem fell, and the first temple was destroyed in 586 BCE, marking one of the most catastrophic events in Israelite history. Yet even this exile would catalyze remarkable developments. The Jewish people, scattered across Babylon, began to codify their laws, refine their rituals, and preserve their identity through texts, oral traditions, and communal life. Religious innovation and scholarship became survival strategies, allowing a dispersed people to maintain coherence despite the loss of homeland and temple. Throughout these centuries, the land of Israel remained a crossroads of culture and power. Their success and failures were influenced as much by geography and economics as by military skill or divine favor. These narratives, blended in myth, scripture, and archaeological record, form the foundation of the story of Israel, one that will continue to unfold through subsequent empires, exiles, and returns. The lessons of this era remain compelling. They reveal the challenges of unifying diverse communities, balancing the demands of rulers with the welfare of citizens, and navigating the ever-present threats from stronger neighbors. The destruction of Israel and Judah, the exile and return, and the establishment of subsequent Jewish communities would all be informed by the political, religious, and cultural foundations laid during the united and divided monarchies. Understanding this period is crucial to comprehending later events: the Second Temple period, the Roman conquest, the diaspora, and ultimately the modern state of Israel. The triumphs and tragedies of Saul, David, Solomon, and their successors echo through millennia, shaping the land, the people, and the enduring narrative that continues to captivate the world. The year was 586 BCE. Jerusalem, the heart of Judah, the city of kings and prophets, had fallen. Babylonian forces, under King Nebuchadnezzar II, had breached the city walls, destroyed the first temple, and scattered the elite of Judah across the Babylonian Empire. This was not merely a military defeat, it was a cultural, spiritual, and political rupture whose echoes would resonate across millennia. For the Israelites, the destruction of their temple was unimaginable. The central sanctuary of their faith, the dwelling place of God on earth as described in their scriptures, was reduced to rubble. The people were uprooted from the land their ancestors had occupied for generations, forced into exile in a foreign and imposing empire. Yet, amid the despair, a remarkable transformation was underway. The Babylonian exile, though devastating, became a crucible for identity and faith. Away from Jerusalem, Jewish communities began to codify their beliefs, laws, and customs. The Torah, previously a collection of oral traditions and legal codes, began to take a more formal written shape. Synagogues and communal gatherings arose as places of worship and study, compensating for the loss of the temple. Religious leadership adapted. Priests and scribes became custodians of tradition, while prophets, such as Ezekiel, conveyed messages of hope, repentance, and restoration. These writings were not merely spiritual. They were historical documents, capturing the events, trials, and aspirations of a displaced people. Babylon itself, though imposing and alien, became a classroom for adaptation. The very act of remembering the homeland, of preserving rituals and reciting ancestral stories, became a form of resistance, a way to assert continuity against the forces that sought to dominate them. After 70 years, a new chapter began. The Persian Empire, under Cyrus the Great, conquered Babylon in 539 BCE. Cyrus issued a decree permitting the Jews to return to Judah and rebuild their temple. The Persian period brought administrative reorganization and relative stability. Judah became a province within the Persian system, governed by local leaders under the oversight of imperial officials. Economic life resumed. Vineyards and olive groves were cultivated, trade routes reopened, and towns were reconstructed. The returnees faced challenges, however: land disputes, resistance from local populations, and the difficulties of rebuilding a society from exile created tensions. Yet these challenges also forged resilience, laying the groundwork for the community's enduring structures of governance, religious practice, and social cohesion. The Hellenistic period, beginning with the conquests of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BCE, introduced new cultural dynamics. Greek language, philosophy, and administration permeated the region. Some Jewish communities adopted Hellenistic practices, while others resisted, preserving traditional ways of life. This tension between assimilation and identity would become a recurring theme in Jewish history. The Maccabean revolt in the 2nd century BCE, led by the Hasmonean family, epitomized this struggle, asserting political and religious independence and rededicating the temple in what is commemorated today as Hanukkah. These events demonstrate how the Second Temple period was not static but marked by cultural negotiation, political maneuvering, and religious evolution. Roman involvement began in earnest in the 1st century BCE. Initially, Roman rule allowed a degree of local autonomy under client kings, such as Herod the Great. Herod, known for both political acumen and ruthless consolidation of power, undertook monumental building projects, including an expansion of the Second Temple, reinforcing Jerusalem's status as a religious and cultural center. Yet beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Heavy taxation, social stratification, and the presence of Roman garrisons fostered resentment among the population. Revolts and unrest became increasingly frequent, culminating in the Great Jewish Revolt of 66 to 70 CE. The destruction of the Second Temple by Roman legions in 70 CE marked the end of an era. Jerusalem was sacked, sacred objects plundered, and much of the city leveled. Yet, even in defeat, the Jewish people demonstrated resilience. Rabbinic Judaism emerged, emphasizing law, ethics, and community practice over centralized worship in the temple. Synagogues became the new centers of spiritual life, and the focus shifted to study, prayer, and the preservation of tradition. The exile, once again, had redefined identity and ensured the survival of a people scattered across empires. The Second Temple period, spanning roughly 5 centuries, was one of dynamic complexity. It was a time of rebuilding, reform, resistance, and adaptation. Jewish society became stratified. Priests, scribes, and elders assumed religious authority. Merchants and artisans drove economic activity. Farmers sustained communities in a challenging environment. Philosophical and theological developments emerged, from apocalyptic visions to ethical reflections, shaping the spiritual landscape in ways that continue to influence Judaism today. Interactions with surrounding cultures, Persian, Greek, and Roma, introduced ideas, languages, and technologies, while the community maintained distinct practices and a sense of continuity with its past. This era also witnessed profound contributions to literature, law, and historiography. Texts such as the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles record the challenges of returning from exile, rebuilding society, and negotiating authority under foreign rule. Prophetic and wisdom literature reflected the moral and ethical concerns of the time, while historical accounts provided a narrative framework linking past, present, and future. These writings were not abstract. They shaped communal identity, governance, and religious practice, creating a legacy that would endure even in the face of subsequent conquest and diaspora. The Second Temple period was, in many ways, a laboratory of survival. Exile and foreign rule forced adaptation, yet the essence of Israelite identity persisted. Religion, law, community, and memory became tools of resilience. Social structures evolved, political alliances were negotiated, and cultural expression thrived, even as sovereignty was constrained. The period demonstrates the ability of a people to maintain cohesion, purpose, and identity across centuries of uncertainty and external domination. By the time of the Roman destruction of 70 CE, the Jewish people had been tested repeatedly by conquest, exile, and cultural pressure. Yet their traditions, laws, and narratives ensured continuity. The lessons of the Second Temple period resonate far beyond the ancient world. Communities can endure through adaptation. Identity can be preserved through law and ritual, and faith can serve as both a source of guidance and a framework for resilience. The exile, the return, and the Second Temple's eventual destruction are not simply historical events. They are part of an enduring narrative of survival, adaptation, and the quest for belonging. In the broader sweep of history, the Second Temple period bridges ancient and modern Israel. It is a testament to the interplay between land, people, and faith, between conquest and cultural continuity, between external domination and internal resilience. Understanding this period is essential to comprehending the subsequent chapters of Jewish history. The spread of the diaspora, the evolution of Rabbinic Judaism, and the enduring connection to a homeland that would one day become the modern state of Israel. The exile, the return, and the Second Temple's rise and fall illustrate a central theme of Israel's story: that identity and faith are not dependent solely on physical control of territory. Even when the land was lost, the people maintained a connection to it through law, ritual, and memory. Even when political sovereignty was denied, social structures, education, and spiritual practice ensured continuity. And even in the face of destruction, the narrative of survival, resilience, and hope endured, providing a foundation for future generations. Thus, the Second Temple period stands as one of the most defining eras in the history of Israel. It is a period of reconstruction, of cultural and religious flourishing, of negotiation with empires, and of enduring lessons about identity and survival. The events, figures, and ideas of this time would shape the Jewish people's relationship with their land, their God, and the wider world for centuries to come. The fall of the Second Temple in 70 CE did not mark the end of the Jewish presence in the land of Israel, nor did it extinguish the identity of a people bound by history, faith, and memory. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter defined by dispersion, adaptation, and the complex relationship between homeland and diaspora. For centuries, the Jewish people would navigate life under successive empires, forging communities far from Jerusalem while maintaining the rituals, laws, and cultural identity that linked them across space and time. The Roman destruction of Jerusalem left deep scars. Cities were reduced to rubble, sacred objects were carried away as trophies, and thousands of inhabitants were killed or enslaved. Yet not all Jews left the land. Communities persisted in Galilee, the Negev, and smaller towns, adapting to new political realities while continuing religious and social traditions. Pilgrimages to the ruins of the temple became acts of devotion and remembrance. The tension between life under imperial rule and attachment to the sacred land defined the Jewish experience for centuries to come. The spread of Jewish communities across the Roman Empire created a mosaic of diasporic life. From Alexandria in Egypt to Babylon in Mesopotamia, Jews maintained networks of trade, scholarship, and religious practice. In these foreign cities, they engaged with surrounding cultures while preserving distinct identities. Synagogues became centers not only of worship, but also of education and social organization. Legal and communal structures ensured that Jewish law, ritual, and culture could survive outside the geographic boundaries of Israel. The interplay between empire and diaspora life shaped Jewish identity in profound ways. Roman authorities oscillated between tolerance and oppression. Taxation, military conscription, and sporadic anti-Jewish measures created pressures. Yet within this system, Jewish communities developed resilience. Rabbinic leadership emerged to guide religious life, interpret law, and sustain communal cohesion. Texts such as the Mishnah and later the Talmud codified centuries of legal, ethical, and spiritual knowledge, ensuring continuity across generations and geographies. Life under Byzantine rule, following the division of the Roman Empire, added new layers to Jewish experience in the land. Christians, now aligned with imperial power, imposed restrictions on Jews, including limitations on worship and property rights. Pilgrimages to sacred sites continued, but they were now regulated by Christian authorities. Despite these constraints, Jewish learning and culture persisted, sometimes flourishing in remote regions, in Galilee or the Negev, where communities could maintain a degree of autonomy. The arrival of Islamic rule in the 7th century brought a new paradigm. The Arab conquest of the Levant introduced a society organized around the principles of Islam, where Jews and Christians were recognized as people of the book, dhimmi, permitted to practice their religions under certain conditions. While they faced legal restrictions and taxes, Jewish communities often found relative stability and protection under early Islamic rule. Trade, scholarship, and religious life adapted to this new context. Cities such as Jerusalem, Tiberias, and Hebron became centers of learning, hosting yeshivas, synagogues, and markets that sustained daily life. During this period, Jewish intellectual activity flourished. Scholars in Babylon, under the protection of Islamic caliphs, compiled the Babylonian Talmud, a monumental work codifying law, ethics, and tradition. In Spain, under Muslim rule, Jewish philosophers, poets, and scientists engaged in vibrant cultural exchanges, contributing to a broader Islamic civilization while preserving and enriching their heritage. These achievements illustrate the adaptability of Jewish communities. They were able to thrive intellectually and spiritually even while politically subordinate, blending participation in broader societies with the maintenance of distinctive identity. The Crusades, beginning in the 11th century, dramatically disrupted life in the land of Israel and the wider Jewish world. European Christian armies, intent on capturing Jerusalem, targeted both Muslim and Jewish populations. Massacres and forced conversions devastated communities, leaving indelible marks on collective memory. The Crusader period was a stark reminder of the vulnerability of minority populations in the context of imperial and religious ambitions. Yet even in the face of such violence, Jewish resilience persisted. Communities rebuilt, migrated, and adapted to new political realities, often relocating to safer regions or fortifying existing settlements. The Mamluk and Ottoman periods further illustrate the complex interplay of empire and Jewish life. Under the Mamluks, Jerusalem became a fortified city, a center of religious significance for Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, though Jews faced strict limitations on property ownership and public expression. The arrival of the Ottoman Empire in the early 16th century introduced a measure of stability that lasted for 4 centuries. The Ottomans governed with a pragmatic tolerance, allowing Jews to maintain religious institutions, practice law, and participate in trade, though ultimate authority rested firmly with the state. Throughout these centuries, Jerusalem remained a focal point. Its sacred sites, the Western Wall, synagogues, and associated religious landmarks continued to draw pilgrims from across the diaspora. Jewish communities developed networks to support these pilgrims, raising funds, providing accommodations, and preserving sacred knowledge. Festivals, pilgrimages, and rituals maintained spiritual continuity, connecting distant communities to the ancestral land. In this way, religious practice became both a tool for cultural preservation and a bridge linking dispersed populations. The economic life of Jews in diaspora and under foreign rule was diverse. Some engaged in agriculture in Galilee and surrounding regions, cultivating olives, wheat, and vineyards. Others became merchants, artisans, or moneylenders, integrating into regional and international trade networks. In urban centers, Jewish artisans crafted religious objects, manuscripts, and textiles, often blending local styles with traditional motifs. This economic adaptability ensured not only survival, but also influence within the cities and empires that dominated the region. Culturally, Jewish life during the diaspora was dynamic. Languages such as Aramaic, Hebrew, and later Ladino and Yiddish became vehicles for literature, scholarship, and communication across distances. Poetry, philosophy, and legal discourse thrived, producing a rich intellectual tradition. Rabbinic authorities interpreted laws to suit local conditions, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of the interaction between universal principles and contextual realities. These innovations ensured that Jewish identity was resilient, flexible, and capable of flourishing even without political sovereignty. Religious adaptation also played a central role. With the temple destroyed, sacrificial worship was replaced by prayer, study, and observance of mitzvot commandments. Synagogues became central hubs, not only for ritual but for education, social justice, and governance. Festivals such as Passover, Sukkot, and Yom Kippur were celebrated in homes and communities, reinforcing memory and collective identity. This transformation illustrates the ability of a culture to maintain continuity despite the absence of traditional centers of authority or sacred space. The long arc of diaspora life, from Babylon to Rome, Byzantium, Islam, Crusaders, Mamluks, and Ottomans, reveals recurring themes: displacement, adaptation, cultural preservation, and engagement with dominant powers. Jewish communities learned to navigate foreign systems while sustaining distinct identities. They forged networks of trade, scholarship, and religion that transcended borders, connecting communities from Egypt to Spain, from Mesopotamia to North Africa. These connections reinforced a sense of shared history and purpose, a continuity that would endure through centuries of political instability and geographic dispersion. Despite the challenges, the Jewish connection to the land of Israel never waned. Memories of Jerusalem, the temple, and ancestral lands were preserved in scripture, prayer, and pilgrimage. These symbols were not mere nostalgia. They were active agents of identity, shaping law, culture, and collective purpose. The diaspora's enduring attachment to the land laid the foundation for the ideological and political movements that would emerge centuries later, including the vision of return and the eventual establishment of a modern state. By the end of the Ottoman period, Jewish life in Israel and in the diaspora had become a complex tapestry. Communities had survived invasions, plagues, economic hardship, and religious persecution, yet maintained spiritual, cultural, and intellectual continuity. This resilience set the stage for the modern Zionist movement, which would seek to translate centuries of memory, identity, and attachment to the land into political reality. The experiences of diaspora and life under successive empires shaped not only the Jewish people's endurance, but also their understanding of sovereignty, law, and cultural preservation. The story of the diaspora and life under empires is, therefore, one of survival, adaptation, and strategic engagement. It illustrates how a dispersed people can maintain cohesion across centuries, balancing the demands of local and imperial authorities with the imperatives of faith, tradition, and collective memory. It is a period that illuminates both the fragility and the resilience of identity, showing how communities can thrive intellectually, spiritually, and culturally even when political autonomy is limited or absent. In sum, the centuries following the destruction of the Second Temple were not merely a time of exile and loss. They were a period of extraordinary adaptation, intellectual flourishing, and spiritual continuity. Jewish communities navigated the pressures of empire, survived waves of conquest, and preserved a sense of belonging that transcended geographic boundaries. The diaspora was both a challenge and a crucible, shaping the character, law, and vision of a people who, despite displacement, never lost sight of the land that would remain central to their identity for generations to come. The medieval period in Israel was defined by a tapestry of conquest, faith, and shifting political authority. The land of Israel, a crossroads between continents and civilizations, attracted waves of conquerors, each leaving an indelible imprint on the culture, architecture, and religious life of the region. By the 11th century, The Holy Land had become a focal point not only for Jews, but also for Muslims and Christians, a spiritual nexus whose significance transcended politics. Yet this very centrality made the land a battleground, and the people who inhabited it learned that survival required adaptability, negotiation, and resilience. The Crusades, beginning in 1096, were among the most dramatic disruptions of medieval Israel. European knights, responding to papal calls to reclaim Jerusalem, embarked on a series of campaigns that would leave the city and surrounding regions scarred for generations. The capture of Jerusalem in 1099 was marked by bloodshed on an unprecedented scale. Jewish communities, along with Muslims, were massacred or displaced. The establishment of Latin Christian rule imposed a new political and religious order. The Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem sought to administer the region through European feudal structures, yet these frameworks often clashed with existing social and economic systems. Pilgrimages continued, but under strict regulation and often under the shadow of violence. During Crusader rule, the local Jewish population faced acute challenges. Property was seized, religious practice restricted, and community autonomy limited. Yet despite the oppression, Jewish life did not vanish. Communities adapted, sometimes relocating to smaller towns or integrating cautiously into the new urban hierarchies. Trade networks, previously established across the Mediterranean, proved essential for survival, enabling Jewish merchants to maintain economic activity even under foreign domination. Synagogues, clandestine study groups, and communal councils preserved religious and cultural continuity. The period illustrates the resilience of communities navigating imposed foreign structures while sustaining identity. The Crusader era, though violent, also catalyzed new forms of cultural exchange. Jewish scholars, traveling pilgrims, and merchants acted as intermediaries between European and Middle Eastern civilizations. Knowledge of medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and trade practices flowed through these networks, enriching Jewish intellectual life. Communities in Jerusalem, Acre, and Tyre became nodes of learning and exchange, preserving traditions while absorbing elements from surrounding cultures. In this way, even amidst conquest and upheaval, Jewish life demonstrated remarkable adaptability and endurance. The arrival of Muslim forces under leaders such as Saladin in 1187 marked a profound turning point. Saladin's reconquest of Jerusalem was notable not only for its military success, but also for his relative tolerance toward the city's Jewish population. Jews who had fled or been expelled during the Crusader period gradually returned. Under Muslim rule, the city's administration allowed for religious communities, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish, to govern aspects of their own lives, pay taxes, and maintain legal structures. While not equal by modern standards, this system enabled cultural and religious revival, and synagogues were rebuilt, schools reopened, and scholarship resumed. The Mamluk dynasty, which controlled the region from the 13th to the 16th century, introduced a more centralized and militarized governance structure. Cities such as Jerusalem and Saif became fortified, serving both as defensive centers and as hubs of religious and cultural activity. The Mamluks promoted trade along established routes, linking Israel to Egypt, Syria, and beyond. Jewish communities flourished in certain areas, particularly in Galilee, where Saif emerged as a prominent center of Kabbalistic study in the 16th century. Here, mystical and legal scholarship thrived, attracting students and pilgrims from across the diaspora, reinforcing a sense of connection to the land even without political autonomy. The Ottoman conquest in 1517 brought 4 centuries of relative stability to the region. Ottoman rule was marked by pragmatism. Jerusalem and its surroundings were governed by appointed officials, while local religious communities, including Jews, were allowed to maintain internal governance under the millet system. This system allowed religious leaders to oversee education, worship, and personal law, providing a framework for cultural continuity. Jewish populations expanded, both through natural growth and immigration from Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Sephardic Jews fleeing the Iberian Peninsula, expelled after 1492, found refuge in Ottoman cities such as Jerusalem, Safed, and Hebron, enriching cultural life and scholarship. Under the Ottomans, Jewish life became both diverse and interconnected. Safed, for example, became a spiritual capital, hosting luminaries such as Isaac Luria, whose teachings would profoundly shape Kabbalistic thought and Jewish mysticism. Jerusalem, although smaller and less economically vibrant than it had been in earlier periods, retained symbolic and religious significance. Synagogues, yeshivas, and charitable institutions supported daily life, while pilgrimages and festivals reinforced communal identity and attachment to sacred spaces. Economic activity, including agriculture, trade, and artisan crafts, sustained communities, enabling them to navigate the complexities of Ottoman taxation and governance. Despite relative stability, medieval Israel remained a land of tension and occasional conflict. Religious rivalry, local power struggles, and broader geopolitical shifts required Jewish communities to balance loyalty, survival, and identity. Relationships with Muslim and Christian neighbors were pragmatic, often cooperative, but occasionally fraught. Jewish leaders developed diplomatic skills, leveraging connections within the Ottoman administration to secure protections, advocate for community needs, and negotiate privileges. This blend of adaptation, negotiation, and resilience became a hallmark of Jewish life in the region. Throughout the medieval period, the Jewish connection to the land was sustained through memory, ritual, and education. Even in periods of limited sovereignty, festivals, prayers, and pilgrimages reinforced the spiritual and cultural bond with Israel. The anticipation of return and restoration, articulated in liturgy and communal storytelling, ensured that the idea of homeland remained central. This attachment would later fuel political movements aimed at reestablishing Jewish presence and sovereignty in the modern era. Cultural and intellectual life during this era was both a response to and a product of the empire. Rabbinic scholarship continued to codify law and ethics, addressing the practical needs of diasporic and local communities. Mystical traditions flourished, particularly in Safed, producing literature that would resonate for centuries. Trade networks connected cities across the Mediterranean and Near East, providing both economic sustenance and channels for cultural exchange. In these ways, Jewish communities maintained vitality, even when external political circumstances were uncertain or hostile. The medieval period also laid the groundwork for social and communal structures that would endure into modern times. Governance within the Jewish community councils of elders, rabbinic courts, and charitable organizations provided cohesion and stability. Education, from basic literacy to advanced Talmudic study, ensured the transmission of knowledge and identity. Economic networks enabled adaptation to changing circumstances, while pilgrimage and ritual reinforced attachment to Israel. These structures exemplify how communities can survive and thrive across centuries of shifting imperial rule. In retrospect, the medieval history of Israel demonstrates the resilience of a people living under successive empires, Crusader, Mamluk, and Ottoman. Despite invasions, massacres, and political subjugation, Jewish communities preserved religious practice, intellectual life, and cultural cohesion. They adapted to foreign administrations, engaged in commerce and scholarship, and maintained spiritual ties to Jerusalem and the broader land. These centuries of survival, negotiation, and cultural flourishing set the stage for the dramatic transformations that would arrive in the 19th and 20th centuries, ultimately leading to the modern Zionist movement and the reestablishment of a Jewish homeland. The medieval period is thus not merely a chapter of subjugation or hardship. It is a story of adaptation, intellectual vitality, and enduring identity. It highlights how communities can navigate external domination while preserving internal cohesion and cultural continuity. It demonstrates the interplay between empire and local identity, between faith and pragmatism, and between history and memory. For the Jewish people, these centuries forged resilience, creativity, and a spiritual connection to the land of Israel that would echo across the ages, shaping both their collective narrative and the world's understanding of this ancient, contested, and enduring land. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the land of Israel, then part of the Ottoman Empire, stood at the crossroads of history once again. The region's centuries-old tapestry of communities, Muslims, Christians, and Jews had endured waves of conquest, empire, and diaspora. Yet the forces of modernity, nationalism, and global politics began to reshape the Middle East in ways that would set the stage for the creation of a modern state. The story of Israel's transformation from a distant historical memory to a tangible political reality is a tale of migration, ideology, conflict, and ambition, rooted in both centuries of attachment to the land and the dramatic upheavals of the modern world. The late Ottoman period was characterized by administrative reform, modernization efforts, and a growing sense of identity among the empire's diverse populations. Jewish communities, long established in cities such as Jerusalem, Safed, and Hebron, experienced relative stability but also faced challenges: restrictions on land ownership, bureaucratic oversight, and occasional sectarian tension. At the same time, global currents, including the rise of nationalism, anti-Semitism in Europe, and economic transformation, began to influence Jewish communities both within and outside the Ottoman Empire. One of the most significant movements emerging from these pressures was Zionism. In the late 19th century, Jewish intellectuals and activists began to articulate a vision of return to the ancestral homeland. Motivated by historical memory, religious attachment, and the rising threats of persecution in Europe, they sought to transform the centuries-old dream of return into a practical, political, and social reality. Theodor Herzl, often regarded as the father of modern political Zionism, envisioned a Jewish state as a safe haven and a center for cultural revival. His writings and political campaigns galvanized support across Europe, inspiring waves of migration and investment in the land. The early Zionist movement was accompanied by the establishment of agricultural settlements, often in sparsely populated or neglected areas of Palestine. Pioneers, known as Halutzim, endured harsh conditions, transforming wilderness into farmland through collective labor and innovative techniques. These settlements were not only practical experiments in self-sufficiency, they were expressions of national aspiration, embodying the connection between people, land, and history. Kibbutzim and moshavim became symbols of resilience, community, and forward-looking vision. The geopolitical landscape was shifting dramatically. World War I, which erupted in 1914, would redraw the map of the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire, aligned with the Central Powers, faced internal decay and external pressure. Allied powers, including Britain and France, negotiated plans for the post-war division of Ottoman territories, often with competing promises to local and international communities. The Balfour Declaration of 1917, in which Britain expressed support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, was a landmark moment. It signaled international recognition of Jewish aspirations, yet also sowed seeds of tension with Arab populations who feared displacement and the loss of sovereignty. During the British Mandate period, beginning formally in 1920, Jewish immigration increased in waves, driven both by Zionist ideals and the dire circumstances faced by European Jews. Infrastructure projects, agricultural development, and urban growth accelerated. Cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa expanded rapidly, becoming centers of commerce, culture, and innovation. Jewish institutions, schools, hospitals, banks, and political organizations laid the foundations for the structures of a modern state. The Yishuv, the organized Jewish community in Palestine, developed governance systems, defense organizations, and social networks, preparing for the eventual challenge of self-determination. At the same time, tensions between Jewish settlers and Arab populations escalated. Arab communities, deeply attached to the land and wary of foreign influence, resisted large-scale Jewish immigration and land purchases. Clashes over resources, political representation, and national identity became increasingly frequent. Riots and violence in the 1920s and 1930s highlighted the complexities of coexistence in a region marked by centuries of overlapping histories, religious significance, and competing claims. Both communities faced internal divisions and external pressures, yet the struggle over land and sovereignty became increasingly pronounced. The rise of Nazism in Europe intensified the urgency of Jewish migration to Palestine. The Holocaust, which decimated European Jewry, underscored the necessity of a secure homeland. Refugees arriving in Palestine brought not only trauma but also determination, skills, and political engagement, contributing to the development of institutions and communities capable of sustaining statehood. These waves of immigration transformed the demographic, economic, and cultural landscape, accelerating tensions with local Arab populations and setting the stage for inevitable political conflict. Throughout this period, infrastructure and modern institutions were carefully constructed. Roads, ports, and communication networks connected rural settlements with urban centers. Agricultural innovations, irrigation projects, and cooperative farming models increased productivity and sustainability. Schools and universities promoted literacy, cultural cohesion, and political consciousness. Defense organizations, such as the Haganah, prepared communities for potential conflict, blending local knowledge with strategic planning. Every development reflected a dual purpose: survival in a contested region and preparation for eventual sovereignty. The British Mandate also introduced a complex legal and administrative environment. British authorities sought to balance conflicting promises and maintain order, often with mixed results. Immigration policies, land regulations, and policing measures became points of contention. Both Jewish and Arab communities lobbied, protested, and sometimes engaged in violent resistance. The resulting instability highlighted the limits of external control in a region deeply invested in local histories, identities, and aspirations. Cultural revival accompanied political and economic developments. Hebrew, revitalized as a spoken language by leaders such as Eliezer ben Yehuda, became a unifying medium for education, literature, and public life. Newspapers, theater, music, and art reflected both local experience and global influences, creating a vibrant cultural ecosystem. These efforts reinforced communal cohesion, a sense of purpose, and the historical connection to the land, bridging centuries of diaspora with the emerging reality of settlement and self-governance. By the late 1930s and 1940s, the road to statehood had been paved by decades of preparation, migration, and institution building. The Yishuv had established not only settlements but also political structures, defense forces, educational networks, and economic systems capable of sustaining a sovereign nation. Yet the political and military environment remained perilous. Tensions with Arab populations, British administrative challenges, and the wider geopolitical context of World War II and the early Cold War created a volatile backdrop against which the dream of a Jewish state would be realized. The road to a modern state was, therefore, not linear. It was shaped by centuries of exile, cultural preservation, imperial domination, and religious attachment, combined with modern nationalism, immigration, and global politics. The historical experiences of conquest, diaspora, and survival informed the strategies, ideologies, and resilience of those who would eventually declare the State of Israel. Every settlement, institution, and political initiative reflected lessons learned over millennia. The necessity of self-reliance, the value of community cohesion, and the enduring connection to a land both sacred and strategic. Ultimately, the period leading to modern statehood demonstrates how history, ideology, and circumstance converged to produce transformative change. The vision of a Jewish homeland was nurtured through centuries of memory, struggle, and adaptation. The challenges of immigration, settlement, and conflict were met with ingenuity, determination, and organization. By the mid-20th century, the groundwork had been laid for the dramatic events of 1948, when centuries of aspiration, survival, and preparation would culminate in the creation of the modern State of Israel. The road to statehood is a testament to the interplay between history and modernity, faith and politics, survival and aspiration. It is a period that demonstrates how a dispersed people, shaped by centuries of exile, conquest, and cultural preservation, can navigate global forces and local challenges to reclaim agency, establish governance, and secure a homeland. The vision that emerged was not abstract. It was built on concrete achievements in settlement, culture, education, and governance, reflecting the enduring connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel and the resilience that had defined their history for millennia. The year was 1948, a moment that had been decades, even centuries, in the making. After millennia of exile, persecution, and persistent yearning, the Jewish people would finally reclaim sovereignty over part of their ancestral homeland. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion, head of the Jewish Agency, stood in Tel Aviv and proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. It was a culmination of vision, struggle, and preparation, a declaration that would reverberate across the globe. Yet alongside the triumph of independence, it ignited one of the most complex and enduring conflicts in modern history. The creation of Israel did not occur in a vacuum. The region had been shaped by the legacies of the Ottoman Empire, the British Mandate, waves of Jewish immigration, and tensions with Arab populations who viewed the influx of settlers as a threat to their own political aspirations. The United Nations, attempting to reconcile competing claims, had passed a resolution in 1947 to partition Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. While Jewish leaders accepted the plan, Arab leaders rejected it outright, insisting that the entire land should remain under Arab sovereignty. This disagreement set the stage for immediate confrontation. As the Declaration of Statehood was read, neighboring Arab states Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq launched military incursions into the nascent nation. This first Arab-Israeli war, often referred to as the War of Independence by Israelis and the Nakba catastrophe by Palestinians, was brutal and transformative. Israel, still in the process of establishing its government and armed forces, faced numerically superior opponents. Yet the combination of determined defense, strategic planning, and international support enabled the new state to survive and even expand its territory beyond the UN-proposed borders. The war produced profound demographic and social upheaval. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs fled or were expelled from their homes, becoming refugees in surrounding countries. Simultaneously, Jewish communities from Arab and Muslim-majority nations faced hostility and displacement, prompting migration to Israel. The movements of populations created a humanitarian crisis, reshaping the human geography of the region in ways that continue to resonate. Refugee camps, border tensions, and disputes over land and property became defining features of the post-war landscape. The military dimension of the conflict was complemented by political maneuvering and institution building. Israel rapidly established governance structures, integrating diverse immigrant populations, providing social services, and consolidating defense forces into the Israel Defense Forces (IDF). The challenge of unifying people from varied linguistic, cultural, and national backgrounds was immense, yet the urgency of survival and the shared history of struggle fostered cohesion. Political leadership, local councils, and emerging national institutions laid the foundation for the functioning state that would navigate the complex regional and international environment of the coming decades. During this formative period, every aspect of life was touched by the realities of war and nation building. Settlements had to be defended, infrastructure rebuilt or constructed, schools, hospitals, and public services established. The war also spurred innovation in defense, logistics, and governance, reflecting the necessity of practical solutions under existential pressure. Communities mobilized not only to fight, but to support soldiers and refugees, creating networks of resilience that would become a hallmark of Israeli society. The legacy of the 1948 conflict is enduring. It set the patterns for political and territorial disputes that continue to influence the Middle East. Borders drawn and redrawn, the status of refugees, and the question of Jerusalem's sovereignty remain central points of contention. International diplomacy has attempted to address these issues, but the historical memory of 1948, both the triumph of independence and the trauma of displacement, remains vivid for all parties involved. The Nakba is commemorated annually by Palestinians, while Israelis remember the sacrifices of the War of Independence and the realization of statehood. Despite the immediate challenges, the early years of the state were also marked by remarkable achievements. Israel absorbed hundreds of thousands of immigrants from Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, transforming from a sparsely populated territory into a functioning nation-state. Agricultural settlements expanded, urban centers developed, and industrial and technological initiatives began to take root. These efforts reflected both the Zionist vision of reclaiming the land and the practical necessity of survival in a volatile environment. Internationally, Israel's declaration elicited a spectrum of responses. Some nations recognized the new state immediately, offering diplomatic and economic support, while others refused, aligning with Arab opposition. The geopolitical realities of the early Cold War, shifting alliances, and regional conflicts further complicated Israel's position. Navigating these international pressures required a sophisticated understanding of diplomacy, strategic partnerships, and global opinion, a challenge that Israel would continue to face in subsequent decades. The psychological and cultural dimensions of this period were equally significant. The collective memory of centuries of persecution, exile, and longing for a homeland informed the national ethos. Narratives of survival, pioneering spirit, and historical destiny shaped education, literature, and public discourse. Monuments, ceremonies, and commemorations reinforced the sense of continuity between past and present, linking biblical and historical memory to contemporary experience. At the same time, the early conflicts forged a security-oriented national consciousness. The proximity of hostile neighbors, the experience of existential threats, and the memory of displacement created a culture of vigilance and preparedness. Defense, intelligence, and civil preparedness became central priorities, reflected in both policy and everyday life. This orientation shaped not only military strategy, but also political discourse, social organization, and collective identity. The birth of Israel also catalyzed significant legal and administrative developments. The integration of diverse populations required the creation of laws, courts, and governance structures that could accommodate multiple cultural and religious backgrounds while maintaining cohesion. Property rights, citizenship, and civil administration were negotiated and codified, reflecting the delicate balance between diversity, fairness, and national unity. Institutions such as the Knesset, ministries, and judicial bodies emerged as critical mechanisms for governance and representation. Economically, the early state faced both opportunity and scarcity. Agricultural development, industrial projects, and the establishment of trade networks were pursued under conditions of limited resources, ongoing conflict, and rapid population growth. Innovation, cooperative enterprise, and strategic international engagement became essential for survival and growth. Infrastructure projects, roads, ports, and communication networks linked communities and supported both economic and military objectives, reinforcing the functional capacity of the new state. Education and cultural life flourished even amid instability. Schools and universities expanded, promoting literacy, technical skills, and civic engagement. The Hebrew language, revitalized in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, became a unifying medium for communication, culture, and administration. Literature, music, and the arts reflected both historical memory and contemporary experience, contributing to the formation of a cohesive national identity. Public narratives reinforced resilience, collective purpose, and historical continuity, linking the struggle of the present to the aspirations of the past. The birth of Israel and the early conflicts of 1948 thus represent a convergence of history, ideology, and circumstance. Centuries of exile, persecution, and longing were transformed into political, military, and cultural action. The establishment of a sovereign state was both a culmination and a beginning, a realization of aspiration, yet the initiation of new challenges. The lessons of the 1948 adaptation, resilience, strategic planning, and community cohesion would continue to shape the trajectory of Israel in subsequent decades. Understanding this period is crucial for grasping the dynamics of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the broader Middle Eastern geopolitical landscape. The historical narratives, collective memories, and national experiences forged in 1948 continue to influence politics, society, and international relations. The interplay of triumph and tragedy, aspiration and conflict, defines not only the origins of Israel, but also the enduring complexity of the region. In the end, the birth of Israel exemplifies the intersection of historical memory, ideological vision, and practical action. It demonstrates how a dispersed people, shaped by millennia of exile and cultural preservation, can mobilize resources, leadership, and social cohesion to reclaim sovereignty. It also illustrates the inescapable consequences of historical and demographic realities, the displacement of populations, the eruption of conflict, and the enduring struggle for recognition and security. The story of 1948 is both specific and universal, a testament to human resilience, ambition, and the profound consequences of history in shaping the present and future. The birth of Israel in 1948 was just the beginning of a turbulent chapter in the history of the Middle East. The fledgling state, forged through decades of aspiration and struggle, quickly found itself embroiled in conflicts that would shape not only its borders, but its very national identity. Between 1948 and 1973, Israel faced a series of wars, existential threats, and diplomatic challenges, each reflecting the complex interplay of historical claims, regional rivalries, and international politics. The immediate post-1948 period was defined by recovery and consolidation. Following the War of Independence, Israel focused on integrating a rapidly growing population of immigrants from Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. These waves of Aliyah brought both skilled professionals and refugees traumatized by persecution, contributing to the demographic, cultural, and economic transformation of the state. At the same time, the country faced the daunting task of stabilizing borders, securing infrastructure, and ensuring the survival of communities still surrounded by hostile neighbors.
The armistice agreements signed in 1949 with Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria created temporary borders, often referred to as the Green Line. These borders did not resolve underlying tensions but provided a framework within which Israel could consolidate its institutions and society. Towns and agricultural settlements were rebuilt, defense systems strengthened, and political institutions developed to handle the challenges of governance, security, and economic development. By the mid-1950s, Israel faced threats on multiple fronts: cross-border raids and attacks by Egyptian forces and Palestinian Fedayeen created instability along Israel's southern borders. In 1956, this tension escalated into the Suez Crisis. Israel, in coordination with Britain and France, launched a military campaign to seize the Sinai Peninsula, responding to Egyptian nationalization of the Suez Canal and persistent security threats. The operation demonstrated Israel's military capabilities and strategic planning. Israeli forces advanced rapidly through the Sinai, yet international pressure, particularly from the United States and the Soviet Union, forced a withdrawal. Despite the tactical success, the crisis illustrated the limitations of military action in achieving long-term political objectives and highlighted Israel's emerging need to navigate international diplomacy alongside defense imperatives. Perhaps no event in this period reshaped the Middle East more profoundly than the Six-Day War of June 1967. Tensions had escalated between Israel and neighboring states Egypt, Jordan, and Syria over territorial disputes, troop mobilizations, and threats to Israel's security. In a preemptive strike, Israel launched a decisive military campaign, rapidly achieving overwhelming success. By the war's end, Israel had captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Sinai Peninsula, and Golan Heights, dramatically altering the geopolitical landscape. Jerusalem, reunified under Israeli control, became both a symbolic and administrative capital, reinforcing its centrality to national identity and religious significance. The war bolstered Israel's sense of security but also created new challenges, including the administration of newly occupied territories, international scrutiny, and the management of Palestinian populations under military governance. The Six-Day War had far-reaching consequences. Israel's military success solidified its deterrent reputation, yet it also intensified regional hostility and laid the groundwork for future conflicts. The newly occupied territories became central issues in diplomacy, negotiation, and internal political debate. Security concerns, settlement policies, and the status of Jerusalem would dominate Israeli domestic and foreign policy for decades to come. 6 years later, in October 1973, Israel faced another existential challenge. On Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, Egyptian and Syrian forces launched a coordinated attack on the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights, seeking to reclaim territory lost in 1967. The initial surprise inflicted heavy losses and placed Israel in a precarious position. The war tested Israel's military, political leadership, and national resilience. After initial setbacks, Israeli forces mobilized and counterattacked, eventually repelling the invaders and stabilizing the front lines. The conflict exposed vulnerabilities in intelligence and preparedness, prompting internal assessments and reforms. Psychologically, the Yom Kippur War left a profound mark on Israeli society, reinforcing the constant perception of existential threat and the imperative of vigilance. While wars defined much of this era, diplomacy also shaped Israel's trajectory. The post-war period involved negotiations to secure ceasefires, establish borders, and pursue peace agreements. The 1979 Egypt-Israel peace treaty, brokered by U.S. President Jimmy Carter, marked a historic breakthrough. Egypt became the first Arab country to formally recognize Israel, agreeing to normalize relations in exchange for the return of the Sinai Peninsula. The treaty demonstrated the potential of diplomacy to resolve entrenched conflicts, even in a region characterized by long-standing hostilities.
Other diplomatic efforts, however, met with limited success. Negotiations with Jordan, Syria, and Palestinian representatives were often stalled by regional politics, ideological divisions, and domestic pressures. The Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, established in 1964, became a central actor in articulating Palestinian national aspirations, challenging Israeli control over occupied territories and asserting a presence in international forums. The interplay of military action and diplomacy defined Israel's strategic approach, balancing defense with efforts to achieve lasting stability. During these decades, Israel also focused on internal consolidation. Rapid population growth, driven by immigration, required the expansion of housing, infrastructure, and public services. Economic policies encouraged industrialization, technological development, and agricultural productivity, supporting both civilian needs and defense requirements. Social cohesion, however, was continually tested by the integration of diverse immigrant communities, ranging from Holocaust survivors from Europe to Jews fleeing persecution in Arab countries. Language, culture, and religion became tools for creating a unified national identity amid diversity. The centrality of security concerns shaped not only military policy, but also education, culture, and national discourse. Military service became a defining rite of passage, reinforcing collective responsibility and societal resilience. Literature, film, and public memory focused on heroism, sacrifice, and survival, cultivating narratives that intertwined historical memory with contemporary challenges. The lessons of early conflicts were encoded into national consciousness, emphasizing vigilance, adaptability, and unity. The period between 1948 and 1973 also involved the ongoing management of occupied territories. Israel faced dilemmas regarding the administration, security, and governance of the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and Golan Heights. The presence of Palestinian populations introduced complex issues of legal status, civil rights, and political representation. Israeli settlements began to expand in some areas, reflecting ideological and strategic considerations while generating domestic and international debate. These decisions would shape the political landscape for decades, influencing subsequent negotiations, peace processes, and internal divisions. Internationally, Israel's actions were scrutinized by the United Nations, major powers, and regional actors. Under diplomatic recognition, military alliances, and economic aid were closely tied to Israel's handling of conflict, territorial control, and relations with neighbors. The Cold War context further complicated regional dynamics, as superpowers sought influence through alliances, arms sales, and diplomatic pressure. Israel's navigation of these complex international pressures required strategic acumen and flexible policymaking. Beyond military and diplomatic considerations, this era had profound cultural and social implications. The experience of conflict, survival, and triumph shaped education, public discourse, and national identity. Commemorations of victories and remembrance of sacrifices reinforced collective memory. Literature, arts, and media explored themes of heroism, loss, and national destiny. Military and civil service became intertwined with social integration, particularly for immigrants who had to navigate new cultural and linguistic landscapes. These experiences contributed to a cohesive sense of purpose and national cohesion amid diversity and ongoing threats. The period of 1948 to 1973 was formative in every sense. Wars and diplomacy defined Israel's physical and political landscape, while internal development and social integration shaped its national character. The interplay between existential threat and strategic opportunity forged resilience, adaptability, and a sophisticated approach to both defense and diplomacy. Israel emerged not only as a survivor, but as a state capable of navigating the complexities of regional politics, integrating diverse populations, and projecting national identity. Understanding this era is crucial for appreciating the enduring dynamics of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, regional politics, and global perceptions of the Middle East. The military victories, diplomatic breakthroughs, and societal transformations established patterns that continue to influence policy, identity, and security. The lessons of adaptation, strategic foresight, and community cohesion remained central to the narrative of Israel's modern history. By the late 20th century, Israel had firmly established itself as a sovereign state, yet the land remained a landscape of unresolved conflict, enduring tension, and fragile hope. The wars of 1948, 1956, 1967, and 1973 had forged a nation resilient and vigilant, but the human and political consequences of those conflicts continued to shape everyday life. Peace, elusive and fragile, became both a national aspiration and a persistent challenge. In this period, the story of Israel is not only of conflict but of negotiation, social transformation, and the struggle to reconcile history, security, and identity. The 1973 Yom Kippur War left Israel victorious on the battlefield but shaken in spirit. The war exposed vulnerabilities in intelligence, preparedness, and political decision-making, forcing the nation to confront both its strategic limitations and the profound human cost of ongoing conflict. Thousands of soldiers were killed or wounded, families displaced, and communities traumatized. National introspection followed, shaping military doctrine, foreign policy, and the collective psyche. Politically, the war accelerated Israel's movement toward diplomacy. While territorial control remained strategically important, leaders recognized that military victories alone could not secure long-term stability. The need to engage with Arab neighbors, negotiate settlements, and establish frameworks for coexistence became a central concern. The recognition that Israel could survive militarily did not eliminate the urgent question of legitimacy, security, and regional acceptance. The first significant breakthrough came in the late 1970s. After decades of hostility, Israel and Egypt embarked on a historic negotiation under the auspices of U.S. President Jimmy Carter. The Camp David Accords of 1978 culminated in the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty of 1979, the first formal recognition of Israel by an Arab state. Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem began negotiated terms that included the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Sinai Peninsula and mutual recognition of sovereignty. The treaty marked a profound transformation in regional politics. Egypt's recognition provided Israel with a measure of strategic stability, demonstrating that negotiation and compromise could produce tangible results. Yet the peace came at a price. Sadat faced severe domestic backlash, ultimately leading to his assassination in 1981. Within Israel, debates emerged over the costs and benefits of concessions, the moral and strategic dimensions of territorial compromise, and the long-term implications for Palestinian populations. While Israel forged peace with some neighbors, the unresolved question of the Palestinians remained central. In the occupied territories, the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, Palestinians experienced military governance, settlement expansion, and restrictions on movement, leading to widespread frustration and resistance. These conditions gave rise to the First Intifada, 1987 to 1993, a grassroots uprising marked by civil disobedience, protests, and occasional violence. The Intifada highlighted the persistence of Palestinian national identity and the limits of military solutions. Israel faced a delicate challenge, ensuring security while addressing the humanitarian, political, and social dimensions of occupation. Policies were debated, revised, and contested internally, reflecting the tension between maintaining territorial control and pursuing long-term stability. International attention intensified, with the United Nations, United States, and European powers engaging diplomatically, often pressing Israel to negotiate with Palestinian representatives. The dynamics of occupation, resistance, and international pressure created a complex environment in which military, political, and humanitarian considerations were intertwined. Amid conflict and international scrutiny, the early 1990s saw renewed efforts at negotiation. The Oslo Accords, 1993 to 1995, represented a landmark attempt to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through mutual recognition, phased withdrawal, and the establishment of the Palestinian Authority. Leaders Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres, and Palestinian Chairman Yasser Arafat agreed to frameworks that envisioned a two-state solution, a concept that had long been a cornerstone of international diplomacy. The Oslo process reflected both promise and peril. Initial optimism gave way to skepticism as implementation proved difficult. Settlements, security arrangements, and political violence challenged the agreements, while internal opposition on both sides fueled tension. Yet the accords demonstrated the possibility of dialogue, compromise, and incremental progress. They underscored that Israel's contemporary challenges were not only military or political, but also deeply rooted in identity, history, and collective memory. Beyond politics and diplomacy, Israel's society continued to evolve. The late 20th and early 21st centuries saw rapid economic growth, technological innovation, and cultural flourishing. Tel Aviv became a global hub for technology and entrepreneurship, while Jerusalem retained its central religious and historical significance. Immigration from the former Soviet Union, Ethiopia, and other regions diversified the population, bringing new skills, languages, and perspectives. This demographic dynamism strengthened economic capacity and enriched cultural life, even as it posed challenges for social cohesion and integration. Education and public discourse became arenas for negotiating national identity. Schools taught history, language, and civic responsibility, emphasizing both the heritage of the Jewish people and the realities of contemporary citizenship. Cultural production, literature, theater, film, and music explored themes of memory, conflict, and coexistence, reflecting a society grappling with both triumph and trauma. The public narrative highlighted resilience, innovation, and continuity, linking Israel's ancient history with its modern aspirations. Israel's unique security situation shaped not only military strategy, but also economic and technological development. The perpetual need for defense and intelligence fostered innovation in cyber technology, surveillance, and military engineering. Research institutions and startups emerged, producing global contributions in medicine, agriculture, and software. In this way, Israel's contemporary identity is inseparable from both its historical experience of conflict and its adaptive, forward-looking mindset. Despite achievements, Israel faces ongoing challenges. The status of Jerusalem remains contested, with religious, historical, and political claims complicating negotiations. Borders, settlements, and the rights of Palestinian populations continue to provoke debate domestically and internationally. Regional instability, shifting alliances, and global diplomacy influence security, trade, and political strategy. Internally, debates over democracy, civil rights, and social integration reflect the tension between historical memory, national identity, and the demands of modern statehood. The question of coexistence, central to Israel's history, remains unresolved. Efforts to achieve lasting peace with Palestinians, neighboring states, and within Israel's diverse society have produced mixed results. Violence, terrorism, and political polarization underscore the fragility of peace, while diplomatic initiatives, dialogue, and cultural engagement demonstrate pathways toward reconciliation. The dual realities of conflict and cooperation define contemporary Israel, reflecting the legacies of history and the persistent imperatives of security, identity, and diplomacy. Israel's history in this period cannot be understood without considering its global context. The nation navigates international politics shaped by superpower rivalries, alliances, and regional dynamics. Relations with the United States, European powers, and the United Nations influence security, trade, and diplomatic strategy. International perceptions of legitimacy, human rights, and territorial claims impact both policy and public opinion, reinforcing the complexity of governing a state whose history and geography place it at the center of global attention. The late 20th and early 21st centuries reveal a nation simultaneously rooted in history and oriented toward the future. Israel embodies both continuity and change. The memory of exile and survival informs contemporary decisions. The legacy of ancient kingdoms and modern struggles shapes national identity. Peace efforts, whether through treaties, accords, or dialogue, coexist with unresolved conflict, reflecting the persistent tension between aspiration and reality. The societal, economic, and cultural evolution of Israel illustrates resilience, adaptability, and the enduring significance of a land that has shaped and been shaped by its people for millennia. Understanding this era requires recognizing the interplay of historical memory, diplomacy, social development, and security imperatives. Israel's contemporary challenges are inseparable from its long and complex history, demonstrating how past experiences of conquest, exile, and settlement continue to influence present realities. The narrative of peace efforts and ongoing challenges underscores that Israel's story is neither linear nor simplistic. It is a mosaic of ambition, struggle, compromise, and identity, shaped by both the land and its people. In the early decades of the 21st century, Israel stands as a nation that embodies both history and modernity, a land where ancient memory and contemporary innovation intersect. The narrow stretch of land along the eastern Mediterranean that once hosted the kingdoms of Saul, David, and Solomon now hosts bustling cities, thriving industries, and a society whose identity is continually evolving. Modern Israel is defined not only by its struggles and conflicts, but by its creativity, technological advancement, cultural richness, and the enduring connection of its people to their land. One of the defining features of modern Israel is its remarkable emergence as a global center of technological innovation. Often referred to as the startup nation, Israel has fostered an ecosystem of entrepreneurship and research that is unparalleled in proportion to its size. Tel Aviv, Herzliya, and Haifa have become hubs for tech companies, incubators, and venture capital, attracting talent from around the world. Israeli startups have revolutionized sectors from cybersecurity and artificial intelligence to medical technology and agriculture, transforming the nation's economy and enhancing its global influence. The factors behind this innovation are deeply rooted in Israel's historical and social context. A society shaped by existential threats, rapid integration of diverse populations, and a tradition of education and critical thinking has cultivated resilience, problem-solving, and creativity. Military service, a universal experience for many Israelis, has also contributed to skills in leadership, organization, and technological development, particularly through elite units specializing in intelligence, communications, and cyber operations. These forces have converged to make Israel not just a survivor, but a pioneer in a rapidly changing world. Agricultural innovation remains another cornerstone of Israel's modern development. The kibbutz movement, established in the early 20th century, laid the groundwork for collective experimentation and sustainable farming practices. Israel's expertise in irrigation, desert agriculture, and crop technology has not only fed its population, but has been exported globally, helping arid regions around the world achieve food security. In this way, the lessons of survival, adaptation, and community cohesion, central themes throughout Israel's history, continue to shape contemporary practice. Modern Israel is also a vibrant center of culture, reflecting the country's diverse population and historical complexity. Waves of immigration from Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, the former Soviet Union, and Ethiopia have created a multicultural society, rich in languages, traditions, and perspectives. Hebrew serves as a unifying language, yet Arabic, Russian, Amharic, and English coexist, reflecting the pluralism of Israeli society. The arts flourish across literature, theater, music, and film. Israeli authors, playwrights, and filmmakers explore themes of identity, memory, conflict, and coexistence, linking contemporary experience with historical narrative. Festivals, museums, and cultural institutions celebrate both Jewish heritage and the contributions of diverse communities, creating a dynamic cultural landscape. Jerusalem remains the spiritual and historical heart of the nation, while Tel Aviv embodies cosmopolitan modernity, nightlife, and international influence. Education continues to play a central role in shaping national identity. Schools, universities, and research institutions promote scientific inquiry, technical proficiency, and cultural literacy. Programs emphasize both the history of Israel from biblical times through modern struggles and the skills necessary for global engagement. In classrooms across the nation, the narrative of survival, resilience, and continuity is intertwined with practical knowledge and creative thinking, ensuring that Israel's historical memory informs its future trajectory. Israel's modern society is characterized by a complex and often contentious political landscape. As a parliamentary democracy, it combines elements of representation, coalition governance, and active civil participation. Political discourse frequently reflects historical experiences, demographic shifts, and the ongoing challenges of coexistence. Issues related to security, settlements, minority rights, and international relations dominate public debate, while diverse religious, ethnic, and cultural groups negotiate their place within the national framework. The interplay between secular and religious communities, Jewish and Arab citizens, and various immigrant populations contributes to a dynamic yet challenging social environment. Questions of identity, citizenship, and belonging are debated in public forums, legislation, and educational institutions. Israel's society is thus both a reflection of its historical continuity and a laboratory of modern pluralism, grappling with the tensions between tradition, innovation, and the imperatives of coexistence. No discussion of modern Israel would be complete without Jerusalem, a city that embodies the nation's historical depth, spiritual significance, and contemporary complexity. Jerusalem is simultaneously the seat of government, a religious center for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and a living symbol of continuity and contestation. The city's ancient walls, sacred sites, and neighborhoods tell stories spanning millennia, while modern infrastructure, civic institutions, and vibrant communities reflect contemporary life. The status of Jerusalem remains central to Israel's identity and international relations. Political decisions, urban development, and religious policy are closely intertwined, with implications for diplomacy, security, and cultural heritage. For Israelis, Jerusalem represents not only history but national aspiration. For Palestinians and the broader Arab world, it is also a focal point of claim and memory. This duality makes Jerusalem both a source of pride and a focal point of ongoing challenge. Modern Israel continues to navigate a landscape defined by security concerns. Its strategic position, surrounded by states with varying degrees of hostility and cooperation, has necessitated sophisticated military and intelligence capabilities. The Israel Defense Forces, IDF, remains central not only for defense, but for societal cohesion, technological development, and civic identity. Security is both a practical necessity and a cultural imperative, reflecting centuries of historical experience with conquest, displacement, and survival. Terrorism, regional instability, and international threats shape domestic and foreign policy. Defense strategies, intelligence operations, and technological innovations are closely integrated, creating a state where civilian life and security planning are interdependent. The lessons of history, vigilance, preparation, and adaptation continue to inform national policy, community resilience, and public consciousness. Israel's modern identity is inseparable from its role in the international community. Diplomatic relations, trade agreements, and participation in global forums are shaped by both strategic necessity and historical legacy. Peace treaties, normalization agreements with neighboring states, and global partnerships have created avenues for stability and cooperation, even as unresolved conflicts persist. Israel's experience demonstrates the interdependence of domestic development, regional diplomacy, and global engagement, highlighting the ongoing negotiation between security, sovereignty, and integration. Modern Israel is a nation defined by memory and aspiration. The Holocaust, the centuries of exile, and the struggles of statehood are embedded in national consciousness, influencing education, culture, and civic life. Public commemorations, museums, and memorials reinforce historical continuity, connecting ancient kingdoms, diaspora experiences, and modern achievements. This deep awareness of history shapes societal values, collective resilience, and national identity, ensuring that the lessons of the past inform the decisions of the present. The contemporary narrative of Israel is one of continuity and contradiction, a nation of technological marvels and ancient sites, of democratic institutions and contested identities, of innovation and historical memory. It reflects the intersection of survival and creativity, struggle and achievement, tradition and modernity. Israelis navigate these dualities daily, embodying a society that is at once deeply rooted in history and oriented toward an ambitious future. As Israel moves further into the 21st century, it faces both opportunities and challenges. Technological innovation, cultural dynamism, and economic growth position the nation as a significant global actor. Yet the unresolved Israeli-Palestinian conflict, regional instability, and internal social divisions require ongoing negotiation, adaptation, and vision. The nation's ability to balance security, identity, and coexistence will shape its trajectory for decades to come. Ultimately, modern Israel is a testament to the resilience of its people and the enduring significance of its land. It is a nation that has absorbed the lessons of millennia from biblical kingdoms to diaspora survival, from wars of independence to modern diplomacy, and transformed them into a unique societal fabric. The narrative of Israel today is one of innovation grounded in memory, a society that honors its past while shaping a dynamic and complex present.